Oftentimes when I'm preaching, I tell you that there's three time periods you always have to keep in tension: when Jesus actually lived, when the Gospels were being written, and our world today. The scripture we have to work with today, we don't need to keep those three in tension because what was going on 2,000 years ago is very much still going on today. We can see it. The question of authority. It's a rough one because we live in a world of a hierarchy. There is no greater judgment of someone else being unacceptable than asking them, what authority do you have to be there? Any of us who are in leadership have asked that question and have had that question asked of us. And if we are trying to strong arm the situation, then we have already lost. Let's look at the gospel a little bit. We have Jesus coming into the temple. Now, this is Holy Week. So already we have a Jesus that's just done. There is no more entertaining the masses. There is no more explaining things, especially to his disciples. There is no time for anything. Jesus knows that he is not going to be around for long. By the end of the week, it is done. He has gotten everything said that he can possibly be said. So there's no time for games. And he's in the temple teaching, which he's allowed to do as a rabbi. He's allowed to teach folks what's what. And the temple authorities, so that's the priests, the Sanhedrin, the Pharisees, the scribes, anybody who is paid by the temple, anybody who has a position of power in the temple, has authority, comes to him and says, what right do you have to teach anything? Because remember, Jesus' message has been challenging the authority of those in leadership of the temple. He's watched them, he's criticized them for years now on how they put emphasis on the wrong things. They're obsessed with ritual cleaning, but they're not obsessed with treating people properly. They're obsessed with how people dress and how they earn their money, but they're not obsessed with how they're living their lives, how much love they're sharing with their community, how much caring they have for each other. Jesus has criticized this the entire time, and he doesn't let up in Holy Week. I mean, this is just after him cleansing the temple. Like, he is not having it anymore. And the authorities, those who are in charge, in power, want to challenge him and shut him down. They don't want this anymore. That is something you can get in any modern church here, because the very nature of being a religious leader, what I'm doing right now, means that I have a certain amount of authority. So do others. And if we take the authority as a birthright, as opposed to a promise, then we've got a problem. And there are way too many in the church today, as there were in the temple 2,000 years ago, that take that authority as a birthright, that they have the ability to judge others and tell others what they should do and what they should think. Life does not change. People are not that complicated, and 2,000 years has not made a difference in this basic human practice of trying to have authority over others. So Jesus gets into a conversation with the priest, who challenges him and says, what authority do you have? And he said, you know what? I'll answer you, but first you have to answer me. So when John the Baptist was teaching here, was his teachings, his baptisms, were they from God? Or were they just human creations? And then those in authority, who probably do have an answer, stopped, because politics now becomes an issue. And they didn't want to answer that question, because that would mean they would be offending some of the people who were in the temple. So they talk about this in a sidebar. And they said, well, what do we answer? I mean, if we say it's by God, then basically we're telling Jesus, go ahead, because we can even identify the authority. And if we say this is a human thing, then we're going to anger a whole lot of people who are followers of John, and that's not a good scene either. So the authorities cop out. They just don't answer. They said, I have no idea. And Jesus says, okay, well, then I have no answer for you. And the stage is set for what the scribes and the Pharisees, what the Sadducees, the Sanhedrin is going to do, which is set a process in motion which will eventually lead to Jesus' death. And Jesus tells them, I'm going to tell you a story. He says there's two sons. One son says, yeah, whatever you want, Dad, I'll get to it, and doesn't do a thing. We all know people like that. Sometimes we are people like that. The first son, however, says, I don't want to. I've got too much on my plate. It's not something I feel like I should be doing. Not my job, not my circus. I mean, we could go on with the excuses. But then sober second thought says, yeah, I guess I can get this done. It's not that arduous, and I'll make it happen. We're those people too, and we know those people. So the beauty of Jesus' story is that everybody is all the characters. But the punchline in this is not everybody has their moments. The punchline in this is those who are considered the outcasts, those who will never be on the inner circle with those who claim authority, are actually the ones that are going to get to and understand God first, get to have that relationship first. Maybe only if those in authority cannot get past their conviction of worldly status. And that's all it is. Because Jesus was not teaching from worldly status. He was teaching God's message of love and equity and justice and acceptance and social change and inclusion and all those good things that a polite liberal society wants so that everybody has access to things. That was the message Jesus was giving. But if you are hung up on authority, you are automatically in a hierarchy. People are below you, people are above you, you know your status. And that is not the world of God. God is not functioning in a hierarchy that we as humans could create and understand. The question of authority is meant to diminish. I've been asked by what authority I speak. And it stops me fast because I'm wondering, like, what version do you want? Do you want my faith to speak for me? Do you want my belief in how I'm reading the Bible to speak for me? Do you want my academic degrees to speak for me? What is going to be good enough to tell you that I can actually talk about this stuff? I mean, the fact of the matter, none of that will. Because the challenge of authority is one of those classic Greek philosophical heresies, or fallacies rather, known as ad hominem. Any child, any kid in school who's been bullied can identify immediately what an ad hominem argument is. That's where you attack the person rather than what their ideas and what they have to say. The authorities, the people in charge, the people paid in the temple, wanted to shut Jesus down. Because Jesus' very existence, his lessons, anything that he was saying directly countered the system that kept them safe and employed and comfortable. When you're in a system of authority, political, educational, religious, pick an institution, it is very hard to work for change because ultimately you have to be working yourself out of that comfort. The average human being doesn't want to do that. It is very difficult to be heard when you are on the outside. Because if the litmus test is authority, marginalized folks will never have it. And so our systems continue. Whether 2,000 years ago or today, the question of authority is the gatekeeper question. And Jesus had none of it. It was not pertinent. It was not necessary. It was not helpful. It did not add to the conversation. So the world that Jesus wants, the world that Jesus taught us about, the world that we as Christians should be demanding, means tearing apart institutions. It means leveling the playing field. It means making sure resources are available equally for everybody based on need. It means telling those who have the greatest power that they're going to lose it. And those people, the ones in power, are usually the ones that keep those who are leaders in authority. Jesus' message, the reason he can't answer is because he cannot solidify a system that he wants to destroy. There's a reason Jesus ends up dead at the end of this week. There's a reason why those in power in the temple are part of that story. They didn't have the authority to actually do it, but they certainly had the ability to help the story along. Those in authority, those who are comfortable in their power, those who like to put up gates and resistance and various levels of hoops to jump through, they're not inspired to change, because we live in a society that rewards people who hoard power. To follow Jesus really means to counter all of that. To follow Jesus, it does mean spending time with people who are never going to be on the inside, but they probably have more insight into God's world than anybody with authority ever will.